The 72nd session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV will lead the chamber in prayer.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask for a moment of silence as we take this time to reflect on this poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson as our prayer today. A nation's strength. What makes a nation's pillars high and its foundation strong? What makes it mighty to defy the foes that round it throng? It is not gold. Its kingdoms grand go down in battle shock. Its shafts are laid on sinking sand, not on abiding rock. Is it the sword? Ask the red dust of empires passed away. The blood has turned their stones to rust, their glory to decay. And is it pride? Ah, that bright crown has seemed so to nations sweet, but God has struck its luster down in ashes at his feet. Not gold, but only men can make a people great and strong. Men who for truth and honor's sake stand fast and suffer long. Brave men who work while others sleep, who dare while others fly. They build a nation's pillars deep and lift them to the sky. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Aquino. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligada, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Sobiri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 18 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move to dispense with reading of the journal of the 71st session, Tuesday, March 7, 2017, and consider the same as approved.
Before that, let's make it of record there are 19 senators, 20 senators present at the start of the session. So, the motion is to dispense with the reading of the journal of the 71st session, March 7, 2017, and consider the same as approved. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to acknowledge some guests of the Senate. We have Congressman Toby Chanco and the visitors of Senator Bam Aquino from the municipality of Tubungan, Iloilo, with Vice Mayor Roquito Taxagan and SB members. Also the visitors of Senator Pacquiao, members of the Philippine Councilors League of Santa Barbara, Iloilo, headed by Mr. Ramon Soliano, Mr. Jeffrey Sumbilla, Mr. Oy Sumayaysay, and Ms. Beth Villalona. And guests of Senator Gatchalian, municipal councilors headed by Vice Mayor Cabueños of Gandara Samar, and guests of Senator Legarda, municipality of Maasin, Iloilo, councilors Lopera Trujillo, Malone Sanchez, Bermudo, Trujillo, Mondejar, Dale Molina, and also from the municipality of Cabatuan, Iloilo, Councilor Borbon. I'd like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to all of our guests, including Senator Gerson Alvarez.
Oh, yes.
Good afternoon to all of you. And Mrs.
Yes,
Alvarez.
Senator Gerson and Mrs. Cecil Alvarez. Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Senator Pangilinan.
Yes, Mr. President, with the indulgence of the Majority Leader. Just another correction for the agenda for today. I already manifested this yesterday, but it seems that it's not reflected in today's agenda. Number 7 of Roman numeral number 8, interpellation. Committee report number 8, Senate Bill 1233. It says here to interpellate Senators Escudero and Soto. We manifested yesterday that Senator Escudero has already withdrawn his reservation to interpolate. So it's only Senator Soto, Mr. President.
For the record.
Thank you, Mr. President. We concur, and also we were planning to adjust the sequence. We will have the Senate Bill 1233 earlier, much earlier, perhaps the third item on the agenda after we've started. So I call for the previous question, Mr. President.
The motion is to proceed with the reference of business. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Secretary.
Bills on first reading. 1366, an act expanding the grounds for legal separation, amending for the purpose Article 55 of the Family Code of the Philippines by Senator Grace Poe.
Referred to the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality.
1367, an act requiring land, air, and sea transport providers to provide priority seating for the elderly. Further amending for this purpose Republic Act Number 7432 as amended by Republic Act Number 9257 and 9994, otherwise known as the expanded Senior Citizens Act of 2010, Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, Public Services, and Finance.
1368, an act reapportioning the Lone Legislative District and the Sangguniang Panglungsod of the City of Iloilo, Senator Lacson.
To the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
1369, an act establishing a Technical Education and Skills Development Authority Regional Training Center in the Mimaropa region and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Lacson.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development, and Finance.
1370, an act ensuring the fundamental equality of men and women under the laws of marriage and family relations, amending for the purpose Executive Order Number 209, otherwise known as the Family Code of the Philippines, and for other purposes, Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality.
1371, an act to strengthen the jurisdiction and power of the Department of Energy over petroleum pipeline operations, and for this purpose, provide a petroleum pipeline code to prescribe standards for the design, construction, operation, and maintenance and abandonment of liquid petroleum pipelines and appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committees on Public Services, Energy, Ways and Means, and Finance.
1372, an act to promote the discovery and production of indigenous petroleum and for other purposes, Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committees on Energy, Ways and Means, and Finance.
Resolutions, resolution number 315, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Public Information and Mass Media and other appropriate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the massive proliferation of fake, erroneous, distorted, fabricated, and or misleading news and false information by some government officials with the end in view of ensuring that the public will not be deceived and that government officials will not abuse that platform accorded to them by spreading propaganda and lies by Senator Trillanes IV.
To the Committee on Public Information and Mass Media.
316, a resolution directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the substantial rise in the number of overworked Filipinos in the past 20 years, its root causes, and to propose legislative measures to address it, taking into account the state policy to afford full protection to labor by ensuring just and humane work conditions as provided for in the 1987 Philippine Constitution, Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development.
317, resolution directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the Philippines' decline in the 2015 and 2016 editions of the Corruption Perceptions Index conducted by Transparency International, and to review and assess the effectiveness of the government's anti-corruption policies and efforts as such allegedly have a direct effect on foreign investment in the country and the Philippines' gross domestic product. Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Economic Affairs.
318, a resolution amending the Senate Rule 25, Section 72. Senator Emmanuel Manny Pacquiao.
To the Committee on Rules.
Communication, letter from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, transmitting to the Senate a copy of Circular Number 947 dated 15 February 2017, duly certified and authenticated in compliance with Section 15A of Republic Act Number 7653, the New Central Bank Act.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
Committee report number 46, submitted jointly by the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Justice and Human Rights on the manifestation and motion made by the Majority Leader Vicente Soto III on 7 November 2016, taking the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Justice and Human Rights to investigate and inquire in aid of legislation in the killing of Mayor Rolando Espinosa Sr. of Albuera, Leyte, recommending the adoption of this report and the implementation of its recommendations. Senator Lacson.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Mr. President, to speak on a matter of public interest, may we recognize Senator Risa Ontiveros?
Before I recognize Senator Ontiveros, Chair requests for silence in the hall and for our total attention to be given to our speakers. Senator Ontiveros is recognized.
Salamat po, Mr. President, and good majority leader. Mr. President, I rise on a point of personal and collective privilege. Ngayong araw po na ito, kung hindi nyo pa po napapansin dahil hindi nyo pa po kami binabati, ginugunita natin ang International Women's Day. All over the world today, we recognize the important contributions that women have made in the course of human history, as well as the important milestones in the struggle for gender equality, such as women's suffrage, equal pay, representation in government. Dito sa Pilipinas, napakarami ding mga bahagi ng ating kasaysayan na bunga ng pagigiit ng mga kababaihan. Mula sa mga kababaihan ng malolos na nangahas itulak ang karapatan sa edukasyon, patungo sa aking mga kabaro na hanggang ngayon ay patuloy ang laban para sa reproductive health. Tayong mga Pinay o kaming mga Pinay ay patunay sa galing at tapang ng mga babae. Through our voices, through our combined efforts, we have reshaped history. We have claimed her story. Hindi lang po ito kaming anim ng mga babaeng senador ng mataas na kamara. Hindi lang din po ang mga nauna sa aming mga babaeng senador na naging tanglaw sa aming daan. Every day, Filipino women are breaking the glass ceiling, excelling in their chosen fields of endeavor, winning medals in the Olympics, sweeping beauty pageants, and in multiple ways, pushing the envelope and creating even more platforms for future generations of Filipinas to excel and thrive. Lumilikha tayo ng kasaysayan saan man ang larangan. Nung Lunes, Mr. President, tayo po'y gumawa na naman ng kasaysayan. The Senate successfully passed on third reading the expanded maternity leave law, which will grant new mothers 120 days to spend with their newborn infants. The last time the law was amended was 25 years ago, when the legislature granted 60 days of leave to working mothers. Kung maisasabatas po ang batas na ito, mas matagal ang pagkakataong mag-bonding ang ina at ang kanyang anak. Mas makapagpapahinga mula sa panganganak ang mga nanay at mas mapapanatili natin ang kalusugan nilang dalawa. Mayroon din pong probisyon na pwedeng mag-allocate ng hanggang 30 days na leave credit ang nanay sa tatay ng bata. Sabi nga ni Senate President Pro Tempore Recto, pasalud. At naniniwala ako na malaki ang tulong nito sa pagpapatatag ng pamilya. What we envision, Mr. President, is a society where women and men are equal, where parents equally share the responsibilities of child rearing, where children grow up knowing that they can be whoever they want to be. And on Monday, Mr. President, we got a little bit closer to that. But while we have made significant inroads in maternal care and the welfare of women workers, in other respects, tayo po ay umatras. The spate of killings in the country has left in its wake scores of widows who have lost their husbands, legions of mothers mourning their sons who have been felled by bullets to their head. Nagdasal ka na? Ano ba? Gusto mo mauna ka? Yan ang mga text kay Teresita Bautista noong Lunes din, nanay ni Michael Bautista na pinaslang noong Pebrero. Si Michael ay pinagbabaril ng armadong mga tao habang inaayos ang kagamitan nila ng kanyang 5 anak sa kariton. Ngayon, ang buong pamilya na naiwan ni Michael ay lumisan sa kanilang tinitirahan dahil sa mga death threats na nakuha nila. Walang trabaho si Teresita at walang pantustos sa 5 mga apo na inulila ni Michael. Truly, in this war, the vulnerable are left even more vulnerable, the weak even weaker. If there are more than 7,000 people killed in the war on drugs, surely there must be 7,000 wives, mothers, and children grieving and living in fear. The cost of this war is not just the actual lives lost, but the toll that has been taken on those who have been left behind. They are the invisible victims of this war. But I am certain, Mr. President, that even as women are the invisible victims of this war, it will be women too who will rise as its most visible and tireless objectors. It will be women too who will rise as democracy's staunchest defenders and human rights' fiercest protectors. Naniniwala ako na ang lakas na ating pinamala sa kahabaan ng ating kasaysayan ay lakas na kaya pa nating ipamalas sa mga darating pa na hamon at laban. I believe that when women come together, great things are possible. Sabi nga ni Senator Nancy Binay, when women work together, we make change. Happy International Women's Day sa ating lahat. Mabuhay at salamat, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator
President,
Ontiveros.
for a manifestation, may we recognize Senator J.B. Ejercito.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senator Ejercito is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will not interpolate the lady senator from Capiz. I would just like to manifest my solidarity as well to all Filipino women who are celebrating the International Women's Day today. We often forget how important women are in our lives, how they work hard to keep our homes and business going, how they raise our children with devotion, molding our youth to be future leaders and contributing to the development of our country. Today, as we celebrate the International Women's Day, allow me to salute our own notable women who remain to be our country's driving force. Foremost, I salute the lady senators here and those before them, Senator Lauren Legarda, Senator Nancy Binay, Senator Cynthia Villar, Senator Risa Ontiveros, and Senator Laila de Lima. May our brilliance, passion, and feistiness continue to challenge and inspire all of us male senators here in the August Chamber to step up our game and remain committed to doing what is right and just for our country. Know that it gives us great honor to serve our country and the Filipino people alongside with all of you, wonderful women. Salute also to our Environment Secretary Gina Lopez, who only hours ago was here, passionately defending her plans and programs to the Commission on Appointments. And to all our courageous women like her in the Cabinet, Health Secretary Pauline Obial, Social Welfare Secretary Judy Tagiwalo, and Vice President Lenny Robredo. To all women in government service, governors, mayors, councilors, barangay captains, nurses, teachers, and all the rest of the government officials and employees, including, of course, our hardworking and beautiful women here in the Senate. I salute all of you. Thank you for continuously reminding us what it means to be not only true leaders, but humans with hearts and souls. Thank you for working even harder than anybody else. Thank you for knowing when to put politics aside in the interest of the people, for making sacrifices to urgently address the needs of those we should nurture most, our environment, our health, and the most vulnerable of all, our women, children, indigenous peoples, and persons with disabilities. Isang mainit na pagbati at pagpupugay sa lahat ng kababaihan. Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo.
Majority Leader.
Senator Legarda wishes to be recognized on the same subject, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Hearing none, Senator Legarda is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to associate myself with the thoughts, views, conviction, and passion of our neophyte Senator Risa Ontiveros, who even before becoming a senator in her terms as Congresswoman of the Akbayan Party, and even before then as head of her party before politics, has been consistent in pursuing the rights of the Filipino women. So I, together with the women of this chamber, would like to assure her of our support for her legislative agenda for women and children. I would also like to put on record that the Philippines remains #1 in Southeast Asia in closing the gender gap, and we are top 3, if I'm not mistaken, in the world. But despite that number, which seemingly is an accomplishment, Mr. President, what we need to do is to provide more access to education, to maternal health care, to microenterprise and livelihood for the rural women of our country. With that, I thank and congratulate my colleague, Senator Risa, who just celebrated her birthday a few days ago, for bringing that to the Chamber's attention. Thank you.
Mr. President, Senator Joel Villanueva wanted to interpolate, but we have prevailed upon him not to.
Majority Leader.
So, I move to recognize Senator Antonio Trillanes IV for privilege
Majority Leader,
speech also.
before we continue, can we suspend for
Oh,
a
yes.
minute so we can greet our lady senators a happy International Women's Day?
I withdraw my motion, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, my motion should be to refer the speech of Senator Hontiveros and the succeeding manifestations to the Committee on Women.
Okay. So the motion is to refer. Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President.
we-
I move to suspend the session for a
Session is
minute.
suspended for a few minutes.
maganda. Pinakamaganda. Ayun.
Ano, ganun siya o siya na? Ganun ko muna.
You ready to resume?
Session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader and my colleagues, to mark International Women's Day, I would yield my chair to a very competent, experienced, and of course, obviously beautiful lady senator, Senator Lauren Legarda, who will now preside over our session.
Mr. President, the minority leader is asking me, you chose Senator Legarda because is she the oldest? No. She's not. No, she's not. She's not. She's not. She's not. No. She's not. She's the most senior. In terms of service, like the majority leader, Mr. President.
You are correct, yes, in terms of service, because in 1998, I was the youngest
Yeah.
senator,
All right.
while
Thank you.
Senator Soto was one of the senior senators then.
Thank you. Mr. President, to continue with the privilege hour, I move to recognize Senator Antonio Trillanes IV to speak on a matter of public interest.
Before that, we saw Senator Risa Ontiveros raising her hand. Sorry, may,
Well, yes.
but you had already called Senator Trillanes.
Yes, since it's Women's Day, we will abide. May we recognize Senator Ontiveros first before the privilege speech of Senator Trillanes.
Thank you, Madam President, good Majority Leader, and my good colleague in the minority. I just wanted to note that age aside, among us women members of the Senate, since not all the men will experience this in equal measure, that like wine, we grow better with the passing of time. Thank you, Madam President.
Well said, I agree with you.
Because it's Women's Day, we will not engage in a debate, Madam President. I now move to recognize Senator Antonio Trillanes IV.
Senator Antonio Trillanes is recognized.
Maraming salamat, Madam Chairman. I hope I won't spoil the flavor this afternoon with this privilege speech. So, magandang hapon sa inyo lahat. I stand on a matter of privilege to talk about the Las Cañas, the testimony. Noong Lunes, humarap si Ginoong Las Cañas sa Committee on Public Order, chaired by Senator Lacson, at ito ang kanyang mga allegations. Si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte ang mastermind at bumuo ng Davao Death Squad. Next. Si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte ang nag-utos ng pagbomba sa mga moske sa Davao City noong 1993. Si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte ang nag-utos ng pagpatay ng Saha family, kabilang na ang isang buntis na babae at abang na bata. Si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte ang nag-utos ng pagpatay kay June Pala noong 2003. Si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte ang nag-utos ng pagpatay kay June Bersabal noong 1997. Si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte through Sunny Beneventura ang nag-utos ng pagpatay kay Fred Soto. Si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte through Sunny Beneventura ang nag-utos ng pagpatay kay Master Sergeant Donald Caigas na tao ni General Palparan. Si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte through Sunny Beneventura ang nag-utos ng pagpatay sa dance instructor ni Jocelyn Duterte. Si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte through Sunny Beneventura ang nag-utos ng pagpatay kay Alan C. at 10 Chinese nationals. Ika-10, si dating Mayor Rodrigo Duterte through Sonny Benaventura ang nag-utos ng pagpatay sa isang Taiwanese national base sa impormasyon ni Charlie Tan, isang nababalitaang drug lord sa Davao City. Si Vice Mayor Paulo Duterte ang nag-utos magpapatay ng isang suspect na nagpapanggap ng kanyang identity sa Katalunan, Davao City. Si Vice Mayor Paulo Duterte ang nag-utos ng pagpatay ng isang nakakaalitan sa trapiko na nakamotorsiklo. Si Vice Mayor Paulo Duterte ang nag-arbor ng suspected drug shipment ni Charlie Tan na naisakay sa container van ni Vice Mayor Duterte. Yan po ang mga aligasyon na binigay ni Ginoong Las Cañas. At as far as the Senate is concerned, lahat po ito ay on record at unrefuted kasi wala namang testigo na humarap sa komite na nagsabi na hindi ito totoo. In fact, ang na-mention ni Las Cañas na si Jerry Trosio ay kinonfirm ng PNP officials as person of interest sa Junpala case. Ang mga CHR resource persons na nandoon also affirmed the existence of the Davao Death Squad. Kaya kung may hinto ang hearing ngayon, lahat po yan ay nasa record ng Senado at hindi po ito dinibate o tinutulan ng counter evidence. Ito naman po ang mga observations ng ilang mga senador. Number 1, hindi maalala ni Las Cañas kung sino ang kanyang unang pinatay. Pero base dun sa ating transcript, dun sa March 6 hearing, ito ang sinagot ni Mr. Las Cañas dun sa tanong na yon. Mr. Chair, noong bago akong pulis, nakapatay ako ng tao pero hindi intentional, reckless imprudence kasi may hinabol ako na snatcher. And then noong binaril ko yung snatcher, tinamaan yung bystander at dahil dito nagkakaso ako, reckless imprudence. In fact, tumulong sa akin dito si Piskal pa, si Mayor. Kung hindi ako nagkakamali, siya ang nag-prepare ng affidavit of desistance. Ngayon, nung clarify bakit kung anong una niyang pinatay bilang DDS, hindi niya ito masabi. At ang dahilan dito ay dahil hindi naman niya na-distinguish kung kailan siya naging DDS noong mga panahon na yon. Dahil nung kinuha siya ni Mayor Rodrigo Duterte, anti-crime unit, siya rin po ay pulis pa rin. So pulis siya noong 1982, nakailang enkwentro siya, nakapatay sila ng ilang tao, tapos na-absorb siya ni Mayor Duterte at tuloy-tuloy yung kanyang pagpatay ng mga ordinaryong tao. So ito ang maaring naging dahilan. Dahil nga, all those times, for 34 years, siya ay pulis, naka-uniforme siya. So kung hindi ka mamamatay tao, o siguro kung 5 o 10 lamang ang inyong napatay, maaring maalala mo lahat. Pero kung daan-daan na ang napatay mo, maaring hindi mo na ito maalala. Kagaya natin dito sa Senado, ang trabaho natin, magpasa ng batas. Palagay ko, mahirapan din tayong ma-recall kung ano ba yung first bill na naipass into law natin or ang ating first sponsorship speech. So hindi nakatagalan yan, but that shows kung ano yung mga weaknesses ng isang tao. Next. Pangalawang observation, magkaiba ang pahayag ni Las Cañas sa kanyang affidavit at press conference tungkol sa pagpatay kay Patasaha at sa kanyang pamilya. Base po dun sa kanyang press conference, sinabi ni Las Cañas, napatay po ang buong pamilya sa harap ko using a caliber 22 with a silencer and the rest po is history. Sinabi naman niya dito sa committee hearing, after a while, I heard several muffled gunshots of a firearm with a suppressor coming from the small house. I then heard the loud screams of the wife, then silence after several gunshots were fired. I did not know how the child was killed because it was dark. I agree with the observation of Senator Lacson that there is a minor inconsistency. Pero gaya nga ng sinabi ni Martin Andanar, ang Tagalog ng Bisaya ay hindi perpekto. Pero ako ngayon, sabi ko, inisip ko, ako bilang taga Maynila, ano nga ba, paano mo nga ba tatagalugin o i-describe yung nangyari doon? Nakita niya ng buhay, pumasok sa kwarto, narinig niya ang putukan, tapos nilabas yung mga bangkay sa harap niya. Paano natin i-describe yon? So, figuratively, it should still qualify. Pero, ano pa man, base sa Supreme Court decision na prinobide din ni Senator Lacson, People versus Merandilla Jr., penned by recently retired Justice Perez, dated July 27, 2011, and I quote, among others, "A witness is not expected to give error-free testimony considering the lapse of time and the treachery of human memory. But this principle, learned from lessons of human experience, applies only to minor and trivial matters, innocent lapses that do not affect the witness's credibility." Next observation. Sinabi ni Matubato at Las Cañas na pinatay nila ang dance instructor na kapatid ni President Duterte, pero may lumabas sa balita na buhay ito. Alam po ninyo, nagtataka lang ako kung paano nila nalaman na parehong DI ang tinutukay nila, kasi base sa mga testimony ni Matubato at Las Cañas dito sa Senado, hindi naman binigay ang pangalan ng DI. Unless sa buong Davao City ay isa na lang ang dance instructor. Ano't ano pa man, itong impormasyon na to ay hindi ipinasok sa komite. Hindi siya binigay as evidence or as information by a resource person under oath. So, as far as the committee is concerned, hindi po ito dapat isama. Another observation. Nagkaroon ng spiritual renewal si Las Cañas noong 2015, pero nagsinungaling pa rin siya sa hearing noong 2016. Ang isang paliwanag ko rito ay kukuhanin ko na rin sa Biblia, kagaya ng mga kasamahan natin, na ang pagsisinungaling under duress or may threat sa buhay ay pinapatawad at iniintindi at pinagbibigyan. Ito po, Matthew 26, verse 69 to 74, and I read, "Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant came to him. 'You also were with Jesus of Galilee,' she said. But he denied it before them all. 'I don't know what you're talking about,' he said. When he went out to the gateway, another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, 'This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth.' He denied it again with an oath, 'I don't know the man.' After a while, came unto him, they stood by and said to Peter, 'Surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee.' Then he began to curse and to swear, saying, 'I know not the man.' And immediately the cock crew. So dito po, sa example na ito sa Biblia, sa istorya galing sa Biblia, ito pong si San Pedro, siya ay, hindi lang siya nagkaroon ng spiritual renewal, talagang he lived an apostolic life. And yet, when he was under duress, he lied 3 times. When he feared for his life, dahil baka kuyugin siya ng mga tao doon. And yet, nung siya ay humingi ng tawad, pinatawad siya at pinagkatiwala pa sa kanya ang haligi ng simbahan. Kagaya po nito, si Las Cañas po, nung siya ay nagkaroon ng kidney failure nung 2015, sinabi niya, nagkaroon siya ng spiritual renewal. At dahil dito, nung nakakita siya ng mga imahe, at doon nagbago ang kanyang buhay. Hininto niya na ang kanyang pagpatay ng mga tao. Subalit, nandoon pa rin siya sa grupo, sa mundo ng Davao Death Squad. Pero perming siya ng mga trabahong pagpatay. Sinasabi niya, naghahanap siya ng alibi, na nagpapagaling pa siya, at hindi pa niya kayang gumawa ng trabahong pagpatay. Pero noong mga panahon na yon, nakipaghalubilo na siya sa ilang miyembro ng simbahan, nagdo-donate na siya sa simbahan. So, itong mga ito, sa pananaw niya, ay mga munting paraan para makabawi doon sa kanyang mga pinagagawa sa buhay. Ngayon, nung nagkaroon ng hearing dito sa Senado, siya ay isa pang pulis noong panahon na yon, at yung kanyang pamilya ay nasa Davao City, at binigyan pa siya ng order ng kanyang superiors to deny everything. So kagaya ni San Pedro, inisip niya yung kanyang safety and security, ganun din sa kanyang pamilya, kaya napilitang siyang magsinungaling. Pero after no experience niya na yon, bumalik siya dun sa mga madre at lalo naging firm yung kanyang resolve na magkaroon ng public confession. Kaya hinayaan niyang matapos yung kanyang pagiging pulis. At nag-retire siya, nagpaalam siya sa kanyang pamilya, ngayong handa na siya, andito na siyang muli humarap sa atin at itinataya pati ang kanyang buhay. So ganun din, kagaya ni San Pedro, nung siya ay handa na maging martir para sa paniniwala niya kay Jesucristo, hinarap na niyang lahat at inaalay niya pati ang kanyang buhay. Ngayon, ito ang sinasabi ni Las Cañas na motivation niya. Ito yung kanyang spiritual renewal. Ito naman ang ini-insinuate o ina-ascribe na motivation sa kanya, base na rin dun sa mga sinasabi ng mga ilang senador. Una, binayaran daw si Las Cañas para bawiin ang kanyang mga unang pahayag. Alam niyo po, buhay ng tao ang kanyang tinataya rito, kasama na ang kanyang pamilya. Siya po ay retired na sa police force for after 34 years, nakuha niya na yung kanyang pension, pwede na siyang mamuhay ng matahimik. Binibigyan pa siya ng 100,000 pesos a month. So, tanungin natin ang ating sarili. Sino ba sa inyo ang pag inalok mo ng pera na pagawin lang ng storya para sirain ang isang tao, pero isasang-alang-alang niya ang kanyang buhay at buhay ng kanyang pamilya? Tanungin niyo inyong sarili kung kaya niyong gawin yan. Nahaharap ka dito sa Senado, gigisahin ka ng mga senador, yung pala gawa-gawa lang yung kwento mo. Sino ang kayang gumawa niyan? Hindi po kayang tumbasan ng pera ang buhay. And dun sa mga PMAers na nandito na mga kasamahan natin dito at sa mga nakikinig, hindi ko po ito binayaran. O wala akong sino mang alam na binayaran si Las Cañas para mag-testify laban kay President Duterte. All right, sir. Number 2, kinumbinsi siya ng isang senador para siraan si President Duterte. Hindi man pinangalanan, pero ako na siguro ito. Muli, sinasabi ko po sa inyo, hindi ko ito kinumbinsi. Si Mr. Las Cañas, all right, sir. Pero don't take my word for it. 6 hours siya ginisa, in-interrogate ng mga senador. Wala siyang binabasa, diretso siya magsalita. Kung hindi totoo ang kanyang mga sinasabi, mahuhuli siya ng mga senador at maliwanag na mabubutasan. Hindi ito magagawa ng isang tao na hindi buo ang loob. At higit pa riyan, kung ipagpapatuloy ang hearing o kung papayag ang komite, ipepresenta ko yung pare na naglapit sa akin nito ni Mr. Las Cañas na siyang nag-vouch ng sincerity ni Las Cañas sa executive session. Gisahin nyo itong pare na ito, kung ano man yung naging motivation. Handa din siyang humarap sa inyo para lang matanggal yung pagdududa na yan. Ikatlong ascribed motivation. 4 na beses daw tinanggihan ni Las Cañas sa kanyang mga proyekto, kaya sumama ang loob niya. To the credit ni Senator JV, maganda yung research niya. At nakuha niya lahat itong mga project. Mukhang may idea ako kung sino nag-research. So, anyway, kaibigan naman natin yon. So, magaling yung research. At hinarap ni Las Cañas ito, inako niya ito lahat. He had every opportunity to deny. Pero as a test ng kanyang sincerity, sinabi niya, totoo lahat yan. Pero nga, babalik tayo doon sa una. Ano ba, dahil nagtampo ka dito, itataya mo na ngayon yung buhay mo? Para lang makabawi dito sa mga project na to. Remember, maayos na yung kanyang buhay, nakuha niya yung pension niya, meron siyang 100,000 pesos a month, hindi huto nagugutom. Itong si Las Cañas. Now, punta naman po tayo doon sa recantation. Ang na-mention po ng ilang kasama natin na wala pong probative value ang recantation. Pero, meron po tayong ilang mga nakuha na sa US jurisprudence na nakapattern din naman dito sa ating Philippine jurisprudence. Dito, a man was released after a witness recanted. John Edward Smith, who was an 18-year-old gang member when he was accused of the murder, was tried and convicted with less than 5 hours of testimony and 3 hours deliberation in 1994, and later sentenced to life in prison. Nearly 2 decades after, when Smith's new attorneys contacted witness Lando Muvueba, he recanted within minutes and said police pressured him at the time to identify Smith. So, nakalaya ito dahil sa isang recantation. Next sample. Murder conviction voided after 20 years. The murder case against Carrillo hinged solely on the word of 6 teenage boys who had been standing with the victim when the gunman drove by. One jury deadlocked 7-5 in favor of acquitting Carrillo, but a second jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison. 5 of the 6 witnesses testified at the common courthouse that they had not clearly seen the gunman. Among them, the victim's son, who said he made the identification because one of his friends at the scene said he recognized Carrillo as the shooter. That friend also recanted. So, na-void yung murder conviction. Dito naman po sa ating bansa, dito po sa case of people of the Philippines versus Romeo Dato and Rolando Batuello, in this case, the Supreme Court en banc vacated the decision of the Regional Trial Court of Ilagan Isabela, Branch 16, dated November 18, 1998, convicting the 2 accused of the crime of rape, sentencing them to death by lethal injection in accordance with RA 8177 on the basis of an affidavit executed by prosecution witness Sergeant Flordelito Sabuyas after the conviction of the accused on January 7, 1999. The Supreme Court, recognizing the importance of the retraction of the witness for the prosecution, remanded the case for retrial. Finally, on People of the Philippines versus Bensurto, which was decided by the Supreme Court December 7, 2016, the recantation, like any other testimony, is subject to the test of credibility based on the relevant circumstances, including the demeanor of the recanting witness on the stand. So meron pong probative value ang recantation provided matest yung kanyang salaysay at ma-cross-examine siya ng kabilang partido. Now, punta po tayo sa independent corroborating evidence as mentioned by Senator Lacson that is needed in furthering any case against those mentioned. Ito pong sworn statement of Jose Basilio. Next. Next slide. Dito po sa sinumpaang salaysay ni Jose Basilio na isang miyembro din ng Davao Death Squad ay na-mention niya ang mga pangalan na sinasabi rin nila Edgar Matubato at ni Arthur Las Cañas. Itong sila Rolando Dawilag, sige, sila Fulgencio Pavo, yan, na-mention din siya, Arthur Las Cañas, Big Boss na si Sunny Benaventura, Jim Tan, at iba pang miyembro na na-mention, Jumawan, Bobong Aquino, Bienvenido Furog, at iba pa. Ito rin ang mga mini-mention ni Edgar Matubato. Next. Patuloy pa rin po dito po sa salaysay ni Jose Basilio. Andito mga description ng mga modus operandi ng Davao Death Squad. Mini-mention sila Arthur Las Cañas pa rin at itong sila Sunny Benaventura, Jim Tan at ibang miyembro ng DDS. Sige, next slide. Dito pa, sa pagpatuloy ng kanyang salaysay, andito si Arturo Las Cañas at si SPO4 Bienvenido Laod. Minention pa si Arturo Las Cañas at Edgar Matubato. Ito po ay 2009 ginawa itong salaysay na ito. So itong mga taong hinarap natin dito sa Senado, hindi po ito mga nagbebenta lang ng taho sa Davao City at pinagawa natin ng kwento o kung sinong empleyado ron. Sila ay name-mention na long before. Pati yung Laod compound na kung saan sinasabi doon tinatambak ang mga pinapatay. Yan, si Tatay Laod ang sinasabi. O, si Sunny Benaventura ulit, Jim Tan, Arturo Las Cañas, sila mismo ang mga mini-mention. Next slide. Ito rin sa sworn statement ni Crispin Salazar. Mini-mention dito na dati siyang rebelde. Ito yung rebel returnees na sinasabi ni Edgar Matubato at ni Arthur Las Cañas na ginawa nilang miyembro ng Davao Death Squad. Next. Dito, na-mention dito si Mayor Rodrigo Duterte. Sinabi sa kanya, kaya mo ba ang ganitong trabaho, ang patayin ang mga salot sa lipunan tulad ng mga drug addict, drug pusher at magnanakaw? Sabi niya, papatulan niya, babayaran niya ako ng 15,000. Ito rin po, that corroborates yung statement ni Arthur Las Cañas na itong mga ginagawa nilang trabaho ay may kapalit na reward or mga allowance. Next. So, yan po. Yung slide nito, lumalabas dito, minention, makalipas na 1 linggo, binigyan ako ng listahan ng mga wanted na tao na aking papatayin. Nakalagay doon ang pangalan at tirahan ng mga taong papatayin ko, inaabot at dinidistribute ang listahan sa akin at maging sa aking mga kasamahan ng aming pinakapinuno sa samahan. Minsan ay mismo si Mayor Duterte ang pumupunta sa safe house at nag-aabot ng listahan tapos sambitin, ito ang listahan ng mga tarantado. Ilang beses ko na personal nakita at nakausap si Duterte. Halos bawat linggo ay pumupunta siya sa safe house para mangamusta. Ganito rin ang pattern na nangyari ngayon, merong listahan ng mga pinapatay. Sa pagpatuloy ng kanyang salaysay, noong minsan noong 1993, may isa kaming lakad na kasama si Mayor Duterte. Kami ng kanyang mga kasamaan ang dapat tumira, ngunit nagkamali kami. Hinabol niya mismo yung tao na isang hold-upper at sa kanya ito ipinagbabaril. Naubos niya ang isang magasin noon. Matapos yon, natakot ang mga pulis at nakita kung paano magalit si Mayor. Ito po ang sworn statement ni Ernesto Abasola. Nasaksihan ko ang pagpatay sa 6 na kalalakihan na nakapiring ang mga mata at may tali ang mga kamay at paa noong bandang alas 9 ng gabi sa ikatlong linggo ng December 2005. Isa ako sa naglibing ayon sa utos ni Tatay Laud sa mga katawan ng biktima ng 3 kuweba matapos itong patayin ng 6 na miyembro ng Anti-Crime Unit ng Davao City Office. Ito po yung Anti-Crime Unit na minimension ni Arthur Las Cañas sa kanyang salaysay. Na nakilala ko lamang alias Pedro at alias Mario, ang dalawa sa 6 na biktima, at 2 ito ay inilibing namin sa unang kuweba na malapit sa bahay ni Tatay Laud. Samantalang iyong 2 ay sunod na kuweba at natirang 2 ay sa pangatlong kuweba. Na dinala ko si Colonel Fajardo at kanyang mga kasamahang pulis na nasabing mga kuweba at doon ay nakita namin sa huli at ikatlong kuweba mula sa bahay ni Tatay Laud ang isang nakausling buto na ayon sa mga pulis na isang doktor ay buto ng isang tao. Ito pong Tatay Laud, ito po ay may-ari nung tinatawag nilang Maa Quarry or Laud Quarry or Laud Compound na kung saan ito yung tinatambakan ng mga sinalvage nila na mga tao. Ito naman, ang sworn statement of Police Superintendent Roberto B. Fajardo. On July 5, 2009, in the course of serving the writ docketed under search warrant 0914347, earlier issued by the Honorable Court, I was approached by a male person who identified himself as Mr. Ernesto Abasola, 51 years old, married, and resident of relocation site, Barangay Mintal, Davao City, and confided to me that he is an asset of Benvenido Laud, Tatay Laud, alias Tatay Laud, the owner of the premises subject of the search warrant. Mr. Abasola offered information that human remains of summarily executed victims could be found inside 3 adjacent caves located a few meters away beside the makeshift house of alias Tatay Laud at Laud Compound. Hence, I and other policemen went to the caves and found out that a bone is protruding from one of the caves in plain view. The accompanying SOCO operative, a doctor of medicine, checked it and positively concluded that it was a human bone. Though it is in plain view, however, I and other policemen suspect that more of such kinds are still in that hole/cave and in other adjoining caves. Ito po yung picture ng mga buto na na-recover nila doon po sa Laud Compound. Human bones po ito. Ito naman po yung urgent motion to quash and to suppress illegally seized evidence na ifinail sa korte ni Laud. Dito nyo makikita na People of the Philippines versus
And it would not be right for me to take it up because, quite frankly, if you notice, my voice is going out because I've got so many things to do that I think are more productive at the moment. And I pointed out that there could be deaths, but unfortunately, no matter how we squeeze the stone, no real evidence has been presented. So, Mr. President, Madam President, I respectfully would like to manifest that I think it should be archived. Thank you very much.
Well, Madam President, given the dispute, and of course, I respect my older schoolmate. So I moved instead to refer it to the Committee on Rules for us to decide on what to do with
It
it.
is therefore referred to the Committee on
Matter.
Rules. We now recognize Senator Manny Pacquiao.
On a matter of public interest, Madam President, Senator Manny Pacquiao.
Senator Pacquiao, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise on a matter of personal privilege speech. Right at the start, my desire is to represent our people who cannot speak for themselves. Bilang bagong senador, narito ako upang maging boses ng ating mga kababayan. I don't just represent them, I am one of them. Sa loob ng 8 buwan dito sa Senado, marami akong nalaman at natutunan. In a state of confusion, we need a clarification. We conducted a committee hearing on the extrajudicial confession of SPO3 Las Cañas to find out if he can show new evidence. Madam President, I want to put on record my view regarding the media statement of Senator Trillanes, reported by Myla Agar as published on Inquirer.net yesterday. The article entitled, and I quote, Trillanes to colleagues, did you become saints after spiritual renewal? End of quote, was brought to my attention. Madam President, karapatan po ni Senator Trillanes na magbigay ng opinyon. Wala po akong intensyon na pigilan ang karapatan ng ating kasama. Just don't give us a bad name. It is good to be reminded that our primary role is to legislate, and when we conduct hearings or investigations, this should always be in aid of legislation. Anyone who is against the President of the Republic of the Philippines can file an impeachment case against him in Congress. Just don't give the Senate of the Republic of the Philippines a bad name. As senators, we are not imposing our morals on our resource persons. And for the record, I am not imposing my morals on SPO3 Las Cañas. I just offended, Madam President, of the statement of my colleague Trillanes, Senator Trillanes, for his statement, Madam President. Noong nakaraang hearing, nag-imbestiga tayo, katulad ninyo, Madam President, gusto kong malaman ang katotohanan. The Senate as an institution deserves to be treated with honor and respect. We have rules and we have standards. As an institution, we expect our resource persons in whatever Senate inquiry to uphold their oath, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Katulad po ninyo, galit ako sa fake news. Galit din po ako sa fake statements. Wala naman talagang santo dito. We all commit sin. Wala ni isa sa atin na hindi gumawa ng kasalanan at walang kasalanan. For the record, I did not become a saint after my spiritual renewal. Sa totoo lang, marami ang nagduda at hindi naniwala sa akin noon. Pero responsibilidad ko na patunayan what I am understanding of the spiritual renewal, Madam President, is do not keep on sinning deliberately. Because you surrender your life to Jesus, then Jesus lives in you. And you don't care. Once you surrender, once you are a spiritual renewal, you experience a spiritual renewal, then you live your life like every day is the last. Kahit sino man, kung ako may tinatago na katotohanan o may magpapabanta sa akin, sabihin ko ang totoo. Dahil alam ko, pag namatay ako, ikapiling ko si Jesus Christ. That's what I'm understanding of spiritual renewal, Madam President. But that's what I'm understanding, Madam President, being renewed of my life to become a born-again Christian. Madaling sabihin na nagbago ka na, pero responsibilidad mo na patunayan na tunay ang iyong pagbabago. Kung sa aking personal na pagkapasidad lang, gusto kong magtiwala, gusto kong magbigay ng bagong pagkakataon. Kaya kong magintindi at magpatawad. Halimbawa, nagkasala sa akin si Juan de la Cruz. Sabihin nating nagsinungaling siya sa akin. Kapag humingi ng tawad sa akin si Juan, kaya ko siyang patawarin dahil nagkasala siya mismo sa akin. Ang tawag nila dito ay forgiveness. Pero kapag sa Senado ka nagkasala o nagsinungaling ka rito, buong bansa ang apektado at sa buong sabay ng Pilipino ka nagsinungaling. And that's different, Madam President. We are not saints here, but we are called to do what is right and just. Just to remind everyone na pinag-aral naman tayo para marunong magrespeto sa ating kapwa. And don't, like I said, even in the lounge, na when you got interview and outside the media, do not attack your colleagues, or else, I mean, hindi naman natin iniwanan natin yung bayag-bayag natin, dala-dala natin yung bayag natin. Thank you, Madam President.
Majority Leader.
May we recognize Senator Trillanes? I think he was mentioned.
Senator Antonio.
So ano, mag-ano tayo? Reference? Okay, sige, sandali.
Hindi, pero yan pa rin yan, di ba? Basically, ito.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, before we tackle House Bill 4637, I move to proceed with the additional reference of business.
Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Secretary?
Committee report number 47, submitted jointly by the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation on House Bill number 937, introduced by Representative Chanco, entitled An Act Dividing Barangay North Bay Boulevard South in the City of Navotas into 3 distinct and independent barangays to be known as Barangay NBBS proper, Barangay NBBS Kaunlaran, and Barangay NBBS Dagat-Dagatan, recommending its approval with amendment. Senator Sani Angara.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report number 48, submitted jointly by the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation in House Bill number 4682, introduced by Representative Pimentel, entitled An Act Creating a Barangay to be known as Barangay Kumawas in the City of Bislig, Province of Surigao del Sur, recommending its approval without amendment. Senator Sani Angara.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report number 49, submitted jointly by the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation on House Bill number 938, introduced by Representative Chanco, entitled An Act Dividing Barangay Tangos in the City of Navotas into 2 distinct and independent barangays to be known as Barangays Tangos North and Tangos South, recommending its approval and with amendment. Senator Sani Angara.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report number 50, submitted jointly by the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation on House Bill number 4402, introduced by Representative Chanco, entitled An Act Dividing Barangay Tansa in the City of Navotas into 2 distinct and independent barangays to be known as Barangay Tansa 1 and Barangay Tansa 2, recommending its approval with amendment. Senator Sani Angara.
The calendar for ordinary business.
Resolution number 319, entitled Resolution Directing the Proper Senate Committees to Conduct an Inquiry in Aid of Legislation on the Alleged Presence of Sex Tourism in the Country, introduced by Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
Referred to the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality.
Committee report number 51, prepared and submitted by the Committee on Foreign Relations on PES Resolution number 320, entitled Resolution Concurring in the Accession to the Paris Agreement, recommending its approval without amendment. Sponsors, Senators Cayetano and Ligarda.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I now move to resume consideration of House Bill 4637 under Committee Report number 43.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure extending for another 25 years the franchise of Smart Communications. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of individual amendments, and we have one more senator who wishes to propose an amendment. So I move to recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Public Services, Senator Grace Poe, and to introduce an individual amendment, Senator Lacson.
Senators Poe and Lacson are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I will introduce my individual amendments, I have 1, 2, 3. If you allow me, if you will accept 2 out of 3, I'll be very happy, Mr. President.
Mr. President, how can I not at least listen to my seatmate? Of course I will. Consider it.
Anyway, as I was saying before I introduce my individual amendments, if the distinguished sponsor will allow, I will ask for some clarificatory. I will ask some clarificatory questions. Mr. President, as I was reading Section 11 of House Bill 4637 under Committee Report Number 43, particularly the proviso enumerating the exceptions and therefore will not require prior approval of the Congress, it appears that the said proviso has virtually rendered inutile the power of the Congress over the franchise being sought for renewal by SMART, Mr. President. Hence, if we read, it says here, first portion, the grantee shall not sell, lease, transfer, grant the usufruct of, nor assign the franchise herein granted or the rights and privileges acquired thereunder to any person, firm, company, corporation, or other commercial or legal entity, nor shall transfer the controlling interest of the grantee, whether as a whole or in parts, and whether simultaneously or contemporaneously to any person, firm, company, corporation, or entity, without the prior approval of the Congress of the Philippines. Here comes the second part. Provided that the foregoing limitations shall not apply. A, when transfer is to a corporation that is controlled by the same stockholders controlling the grantee. B, to any transfer or sale of shares to a foreign investor or investors. C, to any issuance of shares to any foreign or local investors pursuant to or in connection with any increase in the grantee's authorized capital stock. D, to any transfer to another corporation which is a grantee of another congressional franchise for provision of telecommunication services. And E, to any combination thereof where such transfer, sale, or issuance is effected in order to enable the grantee to raise the necessary capital or financing for the provision of any of the services authorized by this Act and or to carry out any of the purposes for which the grantee has been incorporated or organized. Now my question is there anything left? Is there any activity left that will not be covered by these exceptions and will not render the first portion inutile or ineffective? Kindly enumerate at least one.
Yes, at least, Mr. President, if SMART, or I'm sorry, PLDT decides to sell the franchise to another company that's not, number one, a publicly, a company
Mr.
that
President,
doesn't have a
excuse me,
franchise.
we're talking of SMART, not PLDT.
Well, SMART is under PLDT, so the PLDT, the franchise of SMART, PLDT owns 100% of
There is
SMART.
another point of disagreement, Mr. President, but I will tackle that later.
So-
in the meantime,
Yes.
this representation is merely asking for just one activity that will not fall under the enumerated exceptions and will not render the first portion of Section 11 inutile.
They cannot sell the controlling ownership without approval of Congress, Mr. President.
Except
Except with the ones that you enumerated, which is if it's to another company with the same shareholders, which is almost impossible to have. Another identical company with the same shareholders. So if there's just one varied shareholder in one company, then that sale must be reported and approved by Congress.
No,
That's one
the
example.
proviso, the second portion will no longer, the exceptions, I mean, will no longer require approval or prior approval of Congress, but just information. We will just be informed, or the Congress will just be informed by SMART if the activities as enumerated as exceptions will be the same activities that will be undertaken, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr.
So
President.
my question is, kindly enumerate at least one activity that will not fall under the enumerated exceptions.
Here, when the transfer is to a corporation that is not controlled by the same stockholders. That's one. Because here, it can only be transferred to a corporation controlled by the same stockholders.
I would like to invite your attention to letter C, to any issuance of shares to any foreign or local investors. Letter B, to any transfer or sale of shares to a foreign investor or investors. So that covers what you just mentioned, Mr. President.
Mr. President, it's to a foreign investor, but not more than 40% ownership.
But of course, because that's under the Constitution,
That's
that's a
right.
limitation. It goes without saying that you cannot sell more than 40% to a foreign investor.
Yes, and SMART is not precluded from issuing shares of stock to any local or foreign investors, but this must not contravene with the constitutional provision on limited foreign ownership on certain businesses, as you've mentioned. In any case, the proviso in Section 11 already states that the transfer, sale, or issuance of shares should be in accordance with any applicable constitutional limitation. Therefore, deletion was necessary to avoid superfluity.
I cannot see why SMART would report something that is against the Constitution. So they will not report. The
Well-
operative word, my issue is with the word inform, as against prior approval. We, by doing so, we will lose our control over franchise, or the franchise granted, that will be granted to SMART, Mr. President.
I understand and I appreciate the concern of the good senator from Cavite. Perhaps he would have a suggestion on the proper wording that he would recommend for.
As a matter of fact, I have this representation has, Mr. President. Excuse me,
Wait, if only with the permission of the Senator Lacson?
can we just wait for the sponsor to listen to my proposed amendment before we entertain some intervention?
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 6, line 3, remove the bracket on the period. On the same page and line, delete the colon and the words provided that up to and including the words finally that on page 7, line 9. As amended, the new section 11 will read as follows. Thus, section 11, sale, lease, transfer, usufruct, or assignment of franchise. The grantee shall not sell, lease, transfer, grant the usufruct of, nor assign the franchise herein granted or the rights and privileges acquired thereunder to any person, firm, company, corporation, or other commercial or legal entity, nor shall transfer the controlling interest of the grantee whether as a whole or in parts, and whether simultaneously or contemporaneously to any person, firm, company, corporation, or entity without the prior approval of the Congress of the Philippines. Any person or entity to which the franchise herein granted is validly sold, transferred, or assigned shall be the subject to the same conditions, terms, and restrictions and limitations of this Act. I so move, Mr. President. And if I may be allowed to give a little explanation. No. The modes of the transfer as written in the under the proposed measure. The modes of the transfer that merely requires notice to Congress are very expansive. No? And under the 1987 Constitution, Congress has an explicit authority to grant a public utility franchise. It follows that substantial modifications of transfers, such as the ones enumerated in the proposed amendment, can be mandated to be subject to review and approval of Congress. And if I may cite, no, Lim versus Paking, GR number 115044, January 27, 1995, it says, and I quote, "It should be remembered that a franchise is not, in the strict sense, a simple contract, but rather is more importantly a mere privilege, especially in matters which are within the government's power to regulate and even prohibit through the exercise of the police power," unquote.
Mr. President, yes, we will accept the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Any objection? Senator Recto? Okay, yes,
Mr. President, I
discussion.
am not objecting.
Yes, discussion.
All I'm saying is that I was listening to the interpolation, and, I've read this also, and I've signed my name on the report. And my understanding of the first part on the reporting to Congress is only if the controlling interest changes, then you have to report to Congress. Now, the second proviso is that if there is no change in controlling ownership and merely a capital call, then you should report to Congress. No need for approval. That is my understanding. And knowing fully well of the financial statements of SMART. If the amendment will do the same thing, then I would have no objections, Mr. President.
Anyway, the distinguished sponsor has already accepted my proposed amendment.
Yes, so any objection? Hearing none, the proposed amendment is approved.
On page 7, delete the phrase beginning with the word unless on line 21 up to and including the word owned on line 22B. In lieu thereof, insert the phrase in the event that the grantee fails to fully comply with the aforementioned requirement, this franchise shall be deemed ipso facto revoked. So the new section 13 as amended will now read as follows to it. Section 13, listing of shares. The grantee shall list, subject to the requirements of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the stock exchange concerned, and make a public offering through the stock exchange of the shares representing at least 30% of its authorized capital stock in any securities exchange in the Philippines within 2 years from the effectivity of this act. In the event that the grantee fails to fully comply with the aforementioned requirement, this franchise shall be deemed ipso facto revoked.
Pareho lang yun naman eh.
Mr. President, we do not accept at the moment because of certain arguments against it. We've already, number one, discussed about this, and it was accepted yesterday. Number two, the NGCP franchise provides for this, and NGCP is actually a telco company as well. Not just for power, but also for telco. The listing, and it says here, this is the NGCP franchise agreement, provided that the listing in the PSE of any company which directly or indirectly owns or controls at least 30% of the outstanding shares of the stock of the grantee shall be considered full compliance of this listing requirement. NGCP actually is only offering about 30%, the mother company of NGCP, whereas SMART, through PLDT, is offering 50%, more than.
So can I be clarified, is the sponsor accepting or not accepting
Not accepting.
Not accepting. Senator Lacson?
Yes, my argument is the application of said provision in the case of SMART is misplaced, Mr. President. Note that the National Grid Corporation is engaged in the business of conveying or transmitting electricity and thereby governed by the provisions of RA 9136, otherwise known as the Electric Power Industry Reform Act of 2001 or the EPIRA law. While Public Telecommunications Policy Act, or RA 7925. This is the law that governs public telecommunications policy in the Philippines, and therefore it governs SMART. So we cannot compare apples to oranges, Mr. President. It should be apples to apples.
Mr. President.
Only with the permission,
permission of
the
Senator
Lacson.
if I
Of
may
course,
be.
Mr. President.
Okay, Senator Zubiri is recognized.
President, yes, again, as chairman of the Committee on Legislative Franchises in the House of Representatives, we sponsored this measure. This measure of NGCP has also a telecommunication system. So their franchise was both, it was a unique franchise that was given to them. It was both a transmission grid, transmission line, and telecommunication franchise, because they were going to put cable, telecommunication cables on the Transco towers. So technically, this is also a telecommunications franchise, which allows them to get into telecommunications business. So just for the
Yes,
information
okay,
of
thank you for that. So
Yeah.
situation now is we have a proposed amendment not accepted by the sponsor.
Mr. President, if I may also read the exact provision in the franchise of NGCP. Section 20, pursuant to Section 20, the grantee is authorized in the grid of the Republic of the Philippines ancillary business and any related business which maximizes utilization of its assets, such as, but not limited to, telecommunication system, pursuant to Section 20 of RA 9136. So it's pretty clear that they were also given that privilege, Mr. President. And they're also, therefore, a telco service provider.
Are you pursuing it, Senator Lacson?
Yes, Mr.
Okay,
President.
so-
May I be enlightened or be informed of the provision in the NGCP franchise that it is also it also engages in telecoms?
Yes, Mr. President, I just read it. Perhaps the author, is this Senator Zubiri's? You were the sponsor. May we allow Senator Zubiri to read from the provision that he actually sponsored and the intent of that law, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, with the permission of
Yes,
Senator
go ahead,
Lacson.
Senator Zubiri.
On Section 1, on the nature and scope of franchise, there's a line on the last paragraph which says that business and related businesses which maximize utilization of assets, such as not limited to telecommunication systems pursuant to Section 20 of Republic Act 9136. So, and so on and so forth. This is the copy of the law, Mr. President. So we granted them that provision for telecommunications. Thank you, Mr. President.
I am reminded of the proposed amendment of Senator Ontiveros yesterday, which he did not pursue. Okay. So, Senator Lacson?
I will pursue. I'm
Okay,
willing to be outvoted on this.
Yes, we
proposed
have
amendment, Mr. President.
we have a procedure to resolve such a situation. So we will now divide the House. Viva voce. The question now is, those who are in favor of the proposed amendment of Senator Lacson will say aye. Those who are not in favor will say nay. Okay. Is the proposed amendment clear to everyone?
No, Mr. President. May we be appraised again of the proposal?
Senator Lacson, can you enlighten
Yes, Mr.
all of-
President.
Just the amendment, sir. Just amendment. How it will now read.
My proposed amendment.
Yes, sir.
Ano ba yun?
No, it's a simple.
Page 7.
Oh.
It is Section 13, listing of shares. I maintain that PLDT and SMART are two different entities,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
President. And that's the reason why PLDT has its own franchise. And the same is in compliance. PLDT, when it listed its shares, that is in compliance with its own franchise and not SMART's franchise. And having said that, Mr. President, according to the corporation code, every corporation has a separate juridical personality. The doctrine of separate juridical personality is applicable even to parent and subsidiary corporations. In line with this, the Supreme Court held under PNB versus Hydro Resources Contractors Corporation, ito sinabi ng Supreme Court, Mr. President, the mere fact that a corporation owns all of the stocks of another corporation, taken alone, is not sufficient to justify their being treated as one entity. If used to perform legitimate functions, a subsidiary's separate existence shall be respected, and the liability of the parent corporation as well as the subsidiary will be confined to those arising in the respective businesses. And so if we do not require SMART to publicly list their shares, it is as if they are riding on the franchise of SMART, of PLDT. So why then would they need to renew their franchise? If they can use the franchise of PLDT, if that is the logic, Mr. President.
Now, sir, we are ready to hear the amendment because we're going to vote on it.
Yes, the amendment, as I read earlier,
Yes,
and
sir.
I'll read again. Section 13, listing of shares, the grantee shall list, subject to the requirements of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the stock exchange concerned, and make a public offering through the stock exchange of the shares representing at least 30% of its authorized capital stock in any securities exchange in the Philippines within 2 years from the effectivity of this act. Period.
Period. Okay.
In the event that the grantee fails to fully comply with the aforementioned requirement, this franchise shall be deemed ipso facto revoked.
Period. Okay. That
So-
will now be, that's the pending amendment. Section 13 will read that way if we accept or if we pass the amendment. So those,
Mr. President, just one last.
yes, Madam Swanson.
I know that the concern of the good gentleman from Cavite is really transparency and reporting. SMART has an independent auditor. The shareholders of PLDT can certainly look through all the records of SMART. Our concern, and we are quite vocal about this, is also the shares of PLDT because their biggest asset that they're holding is SMART. I know, why should we care about this? It's the widest held stock in the country, and we need to be a little bit careful for as long as SMART remains liable to the public and its shareholders, and they are through PLDT. Now, why are we allowing this? Because we've already granted a franchise to NGCP with the same circumstance. It's a telecommunication, but of course, I will always respect the decision of the body.
Okay, so are we ready? Okay, so those in favor of the Lacson amendment say aye. Those not in favor say nay.
Nay.
Okay, so the chair has doubts. We are raising of hands. Okay, are we ready to count? Those in favor of the Lacson amendment, please raise your hand. Include me. Those not in favor, raise your hand. Kami, ilan? I will announce.
It grieves my heart to say that the motion is lost because
We will announce it, sir.
I see. I thought you were asking me
We will.
because we were only 6 who raised our hands.
And can you explain the rule?
And the rule is that the majority of those present
There being a
is
quorum.
approval.
So I will announce the results. 6 affirmative votes for the amendment, 8 negative votes. The amendment is lost.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, I still want to thank the good gentleman for Cavite for driving this point. At least we are also enlightened regarding the different positions on this.
So,
Last amendment, Mr. President. Ito, I'll explain muna, if I may. At present, no, ito yung sa penalty. The penalty is 500 pesos per working day. I want it raised to 1 million per working day because we did a little computation. We don't need algorithmic expertise, Mr. President, to figure out what is equivalent to 500 pesos per working day.
what page, sir?
Page 8, line 15.
Oo nga.
500 pesos per working day times 52 weeks times 5 days per week, working days per week, times 500 pesos times 25 years, that's just 3,250,000 pesos.
I
I
can
want it raised to 1 million pesos per working day para maging 6.5 billion in 25 years, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I can see the wisdom in his proposal. May I ask for a 1-minute suspension?
A minute suspension.
1992? 1992. 1992. Yeah. Sa ano to? Sa committee? Ano?
Pesos, but 25 years ago.
You ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, during the break, I think there was an agreement reached, so may we listen to what the sponsor and Senator Lacson has to say.
Senator Lacson is recognized.
In the spirit of fairness, Mr. President, after the word non-compliance, we'll insert the phrase, the effectivity of which shall commence upon applicability with other telecommunications franchise grantees. Incidentally, I think Globe will renew their franchise 2030.
And including the amount, we also, plus the amount.
Yes, Mr. President.
So in the meantime, what would be the fine?
So 1 million, but
Yeah, but in the
it will
meantime,
only be applicable to Smart. In the spirit of fairness, Mr. President.
Pag ano na,
because the 500 has been replaced by a million, but
And
there is now a,
but effectivity is upon
Right.
applicability to all.
but there is no more
Stakeholders.
mention of any 500 now.
Increase from 500
and
pesos to
and that the fund
1%.
shall go to the national government.
Ah,
I-complete mo para magpasalamat ako.
Accepted. Subject to strike.
pero in the meantime,
I'm sorry. I accept, Mr. President, subject to style, and I'd like to
Subject to style.
congratulate also the good senator for increasing the penalty by 2,000%,
Which will go to the national government, Mr. President.
which will go to the national government.
And I'd like to thank also the distinguished sponsor for being very gracious.
okay, the proposed amendment has been accepted. Any objection?
Mr.
Hearing
President,
none, the motion is approved.
may I ask to have my seat transferred? I'm just kidding. Thank you.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, period is so closed.
I move to approve on
sorry.
second
We still have
reading.
individual amendments. Sorry, Mr. President.
You have
Majority
more?
Leader?
Minor amendments I wish to introduce.
I move for the reconsideration of the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, we reopen the period for individual amendments.
I move to reconsider the amendment of Senator Villanueva yesterday. In page 8A, line 21F, before the word liabilities, add the phrase valid and existing. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
And also, in the title of House Bill number 4637, after the word establish, delete the word install. I so move.
What page, ma'am? Title?
That's just the title.
Okay. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
I move that the bill be numbered accordingly, subject to style.
Sections been renumbered.
Yes, the Secretariat is instructed to do that as a matter of course, renumber, relettering if necessary.
Okay, that's all, Mr. President.
All right.
Thank you.
Then, Mr. President, I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill 4637 under Committee Report Number 43, subject to style.
Any objection? Hearing none, House Bill number 4637, under Committee Report number 43, is approved on second reading, subject to style.
Mr. President, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of former Senator Victor Ziga, who has joined us today.
Welcome to Senator Ziga.
Mr. President, Senator Sani Angara, the chairman of the Committee on Local Government, will be sponsoring 4 House bills pertaining to the creation and division of barangays in the various parts of the country. No, similar to what we have done during the previous Congresses, Senator Angara will deliver an omnibus sponsorship in the measures, on the measures. However, for purposes of interpolation and passage on second and third reading, we will be taking it up one by one. So I move, Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders the following bills: House Bill 937 under Committee Report 47, House Bill 4682 under Committee Report 48, House Bill 938 under Committee Report 49, and House Bill 4402 under Committee Report 50.
Any objection? Hearing none, the aforementioned House bills are so transferred.
Mr. President, I move to consider House Bill 937, 4682, 938, and 4402.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Barangay,
approved.
boss, barangay.
May we ask Secretary to read the title of the measures?
An act dividing Barangay North Bay Boulevard South in the city of Navotas into 3 distinct and independent barangays to be known as Barangay NBBS proper, Barangay NBBS Kaunlaran, and Barangay NBBS Dagat-Dagatan.
Mr. President, to sponsor... Yes, go ahead.
Continue, please.
An act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay Kumawas in the city of Bislig, province of Surigao del Sur.
Dito ba ba? Congressman?
An act House Bill number 938, an act dividing Barangay Tangos in the city of Navotas into 2 distinct and independent barangays to be known as Barangays Tangos North and Tangos South. House Bill number 4402, an act dividing Barangay Tansa in the city of Navotas into 2 distinct and independent barangays to be known as Barangay Tansa 1 and Barangay Tansa 2.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measures, we ask Chairman of the Committee on Local Government, Senator Edgardo J. Angara.
Sani.
Any objection?
The majority leader is having a flashback moment, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senator Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader. Distinguished colleagues, as chair of your Committee on Local Government, we rise to deliver this omnibus sponsorship of 4 bills encompassed by committee reports number 47, 48, 49, and 50, all creating new barangays in Bislig City, Surigao del Sur, and in Navotas City, Metro Manila. House Bill 4682 pertains to the creation of Barangay Kumawas in Bislig City, was filed in the House by Surigao del Sur 2nd District Representative Johnny T. Pimentel. In fact, this barangay already exists and was created in November 13, 1996, by a provincial ordinance separating Barangay Kumawas from its mother barangay, Barangay Mangagoy. This ordinance was prompted by a plebiscite held on September 1996. Home to some 40,000 people today, Barangay Mangagoy covers the downtown area of Bislig City. And with this many people, Barangay Mangagoy is Bislig's biggest barangay and is in fact, Mr. President, one of the country's largest in terms of population. Kumawas is to the west of Mangagoy and is home to around 3,500 people. The 2 barangays share a shore that faces Bislig Bay. Section 285 of our local government code, authored by the presiding officer's father, stipulates that the financial requirements of any barangay created after the code's enactment must be borne by the corresponding city, municipality, or province. Hence, for the past 2 decades, Barangay Kumawas was getting its funds out of the coffers of Bislig City and at times the provincial government of Surigao del Sur. By passing this law creating Barangay Kumawas, we make it eligible to receive its own internal revenue allotment or IRA share, thereby empowering it to fulfill its mandate of providing services to its constituents. With respect to Barangay North Bay Boulevard South, Barangay Tangos, and Barangay Tanza in Navotas City, Mr. President, ganito rin po ang gusto nating gawin para sa mga barangay na ito. Ang mga panukalang ito ay napapaloob sa House Bill number 937, 938 at 4802 ni Navotas City Representative Toby Ray Tiangco. Pinakamalaking barangay ng Navotas City ang North Bay Boulevard South or NBBS na may populasyon na humigit kumulang 67,000. Ang panukala ay hatiin dito itong barangay sa tatlo, Barangay NBBS proper, Barangay NBBS Kaunlaran, at Barangay NBBS Dagat-Dagatan. Ang Barangay Tangos naman, na may 33,200 population, ay hahatiin po sa dalawa, Barangay Tangos North at Barangay Tangos South. Ganon din po para sa Barangay Tanza, na may 26,000 population, para maging Barangay Tanza 1 and Barangay Tanza 2. Mr. President, ginagawa po natin ito alinsunod sa ating adhikain na mabigyan ang bawat LGU ng sapat at angkop na kapangyarihan at pondo para maghain ng serbisyo para sa kanilang mga constituents. Kasama po dito ang pagpapalakas po ng ating mga barangay. Historical accounts say that the word barangay or balangay is one of the first native words the Spaniards learned in the shores of Limasawa, on the shores of Limasawa. The word alternately refers to a boat and a group of people ruled by a datu, according to the historian William Henry Scott. These two meanings call attention to two important characteristics of our country, that we are a cluster of islands, therefore separate, yet we are also close-knit by units, and it connotes a boat, which indicates the travel we take to achieve connectivity among the island cultures. Hence, the essence of the barangay, being both travel vessel and solid collective, melds that of motion and stability, which in essence, Mr. President, is good governance. When fully empowered, barangays truly become governments for and by the Filipino people. That's what makes strengthening them an imperative that we should pursue today. In a decision penned in 2004, the Supreme Court said, as the basic political unit, the barangay serves as the primary planning and implementing unit of government policies, projects, and activities in the community. As conceptualized in the local government code, the barangay is positioned to influence and direct the development of the entire country. Mr. President, old trees are able to stand tall because their roots are strong and firmly planted. Our democracy can only flourish if its roots, the 42,028 barangays that comprise it, are themselves strong enough to hold everything else up. In passing these laws and creating new barangays, Mr. President, we help Bislig City and Navotas City progress. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you. Senator Subiri.
Yes, Mr. President, with the permission of the sponsor, can I be also made the co-sponsor and co-author of the measure? Thank you.
Would be an honor from the gentleman from Mindanao, especially since one of the bills pertains to Surigao del Sur, Mr. President. Yeah.
So noted. Congratulations. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of the measures for the other members to study them. I move House Bill 937, House Bill 4682, 938, and 4402.
Any objection? Hearing none, we suspend consideration.
With the permission of the body, Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. PS Resolution 320 under Committee Report number 51.
What is that, sir?
This is the resolution
Okay, there's no number. PS
to the Paris Agreement, Mr. President.
Okay, so any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
I move to consider PS Resolution 320 under Committee Report number 51.
Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
May I ask Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Resolution concurring in the accession to the Paris Agreement.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairperson of the Committee on Foreign Relations, Senator Lauren Legarda, be recognized.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senator Legarda is recognized and the chair requests for silence.
First of all, Mr. President, I thank the Senate Committee Chair on Foreign Relations, Senator Alan Cayetano, for creating the Subcommittee on Foreign Relations. I have the honor to seek approval of proposed Senate Resolution number 320, entitled Resolution Concurring in the Accession to the Paris Agreement. prepared and submitted by the Committee on Foreign Relations per its Committee Report number 51. We may be vulnerable, but we are not incapable of action. We have proven this many times when we enacted the climate change law, which is a model legislation for many countries, when we started climate tagging our expenditures under the national budget, and when we led the Climate Vulnerable Forum and spearheaded the creation of the Vulnerable 20 Group of Ministers of Finance, or V20, which works to address climate change more assertively through innovative financing and technology, among many initiatives. In 2015, the sister initiatives of the CVF and the V20 led a successful push to enshrine the tougher warming limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius in the Paris Agreement. And today, I laud and thank President Rodrigo Duterte for recognizing the value of this landmark deal for vulnerable countries. Our nation bears the brunt of climate change, even if we are among those who contributed the least to the crisis. To be exact, 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. The Paris Agreement is a vehicle towards achieving climate justice, as it compels developed nations that have polluted the world and caused this climate crisis to finance the Green Climate Fund and to provide developing and vulnerable nations like the Philippines needed support on capacity building and technology transfer for both adaptation and mitigation efforts. This means that our vulnerability presents opportunities for green, sustainable, and resilient growth. The Philippines' ratification of the agreement will send a strong signal of our continuing commitment to work with the rest of the world in ensuring the survival of this generation and the generations to come, and the ability of the earth to sustain life. As party to the agreement, we can influence the decisions on how the accord will be implemented, and we maintain our leadership role in the international climate talks and advocacy. It was not an easy journey during the Paris Agreement negotiations, but now we are just a step away from fully ratifying the accord. Even as we complete the process, we are already moving forward in our efforts to combat climate change impacts. This morning, I opened the V20 Asia-Pacific Regional Meeting, which gathered finance ministers and senior officials from 15 developing economies across Asia and the Pacific at the Asian Development Bank in Manila to discuss enhanced economic and financial responses to climate change. We know if the V20 does not remain ahead of the curve, pulling the world along with us, we will have no chance of seeing our 1.5 vision realized, especially in the current geopolitical climate. We need not only survive, but also thrive, and keeping within the 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperature limit is critical. Pursuing a development path consistent with 1.5 degrees will not only protect our people and the environment, it will also spur resilient, sustainable economic growth and deliver millions of jobs. We now enter a new era of development pursuits which challenges us to do more, to do better, to be more innovative. Ratifying the Paris Agreement is a vital step towards dealing with climate risks and delivering our commitments for sustainable growth. I therefore urge and request my colleagues to approve proposed Senate Resolution 320 entitled Resolution Concurring in the Accession to the Paris Agreement. Thank you, my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Alan Cayetano is supposed to be back by now. If not, he asked to be called at the nearby PCL. And if not, he requested that his co-sponsorship speech as chair of the committee be included into the records.
Mr. President,
So,
Mr. President,
of the three possible scenarios, the third one is what is happening. So, the sponsorship speech of Senator Cayetano is deemed inserted into the records.
Mr. President,
Senator Subiri?
with the permission of the Majority Leader, I'd like to congratulate our Miss Earth of the Senate, our Miss Global Warming
Miss-
advocate. We'd like to thank her for her dedication and passion has never waned, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the sponsor, if I can be made the co-sponsor and co-author of the said measure, I join her in her passion for climate change mitigation and, of course, climate change action. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, of course. I'm grateful for the kind words and the support of Senator Subiri, Senator from Mindanao, and we'll make him a co-sponsor, co-author of the measure. Thank you. Senator Villar also manifested, but she had to leave, that she wanted to co-sponsor the measure. So perhaps on Monday, we'll just ask her to, she asked that her speech, which she was supposed to have delivered, be inserted into the record as well.
Majority Leader?
So move, Mr. President. Senator Cayetano and Senator Villar's
Speeches.
co-sponsorship speeches be inserted into the records.
Senator Binay also wishes that her speech be inserted into the record, Mr. President.
On Monday or now? Are they ready with their speeches?
She will submit it to the committee by Monday,
Upon submission.
upon
Upon
submission.
submission, okay.
So the three senators' co-sponsorship speeches will be inserted into the records once available or once submitted. Any objection? Hearing none, it's approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of interpellation for PS Resolution 320.
Any objection? Hearing none, we are now in the period for interpellations.
We recognize the Minority Leader, Mr. President, Senator Frank Drilon.
Any objection? Senator Drilon is recognized.
Mr. President, to be candid, we haven't read the treaty. And this is a treaty which has a very wide-ranging effect. Can we be given an opportunity to look at it over the weekend and understand it better and have this scheduled on Monday if the majority leaders, if the calendar will permit it, Mr. President? Thank you.
I am actually sending each senator a copy, or have sent. I don't know if it has been sent to your office. Majority Leader, there's a request to give time
Yeah.
to the senators to study.
Yes. May I request for suspension? Just 1 minute.
I mean, it's suspension. It's like Because you said yes and no vote naman siya. So ano,
Sino si?
yes and no vote naman ito, di ba?
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation on PS Resolution 320.
Any objection? Hearing none, we close the period for interpellation.
May we know from the sponsor if there are any committee amendments, Mr. President? On the resolution, because we cannot amend the agreement, Mr. President.
There are no committee amendments, Mr. President.
Are there any individual amendments, Mr. President?
The individual rephrase the last whereas clause as follows.
Move to open the period of individual
Any
amendments.
objection? There being none, we are now in the period for individual amendments.
Last whereas.
Okay. Rephrase the last whereas clause as follows. Whereas the following government agencies and instrumentalities with the respective positions endorse the concurrence to the accession of the agreement. Close quotation.
Any objection? Hearing none, amendment is approved.
That's it.
Move to close the period of individual amendments.
Some styling matters.
Subject to style,
From the
yes.
Chair, Article 7, can we change the 7 to Roman numerals?
Of course, yes, Mr. President.
Environment is small e, changed to big E. So.
Yes, Mr. President.
Any objection to the amendments? There being none, they are approved. Majority Leader?
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, we close the period for amendments.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading PS Resolution 320 under Committee Report 51.
Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved. We are approving on second reading PS Resolution number 320 under Committee Report number 51. Majority Leader?
Move to suspend, Mr. President.
Session is suspended. Ako din, may lakad ako.
Sige. Wala mag-interconnect, di ba? Mr. President, we're ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1304 under Committee Report Number 35.
Can I have the number again?
1304. Senate Bill 1304. Committee Report 35.
So any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the proposed measure on the Tech Folk Day. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of interpellation. So I move to recognize the sponsor of the measure, the Chairman of the Committee on Labor, Senator Joel Villanueva.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senator Villanueva is recognized.
Mr. President, there are no more members who have signified any intention to interpellate, so I move to close the period of interpellation.
Let's correct first, Majority Leader, the Senate Bill number. It's 209. That is the measure we're now discussing.
Not 1304? Mr.
Senate Bill
President?
number 209 under Committee Report number 35. Just,
Okay.
just to be very
Under Committee Report
clear.
Number 35, Senate Bill 209.
Yes, sir. What is now the motion, Majority Leader?
Move to close the period of interpellation, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Hearing none, we close the period.
Mr. President, may we know from the sponsor if there are any committee amendments? No committee amendments?
thank you.
No individual amendments. I move to close the period of amendments, Mr. President.
Any objection? We close there being none, we close the period for amendments.
Move to approve on second reading, Senate Bill 209 under Committee Report Number 35.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved, and we are approving on second reading Senate Bill number 209 under Committee Report number 35.
Yes, sir. Para masara na natin. With the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1233 under Committee Report Number 8.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on creating the Coconut Farmers and Industry Trust Fund. Parliamentary status of the measure, we are still in the period of interpellation. There is only one more interpellator, yours truly, Mr. President. Now, I have a manifestation from Senator Cynthia Villar, being the current chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture and Food. She wishes to yield the floor to Senator Pangilinan, the former chair of the said committee, to continue the task of sponsoring Committee Report Number 8 on Senate Bill 1233, Mr. President.
That is clear.
For the record.
That is clear and already off record. So Senator Pangilinan as sponsor, Senator Soto as interpellator are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader.
I will be very brief, Mr. President. Just some items to place on record. Some, in fact, have been asked already, but I was not aware of the answer. So will the husband of my eldest daughter answer a few questions, Mr. President?
Willingly and with pleasure, Mr. President.
All right. Mr. President, I'm interested in the extent of the funds deposited with the government through the Bureau of Treasury as of the moment. How much is the estimated value of the coconut levy assets?
The assets, well, cash and assets, Mr. President, would be an estimated 100 billion as of this point. 76 billion would be cash, while the balance would be in assets, including ownership of a bank, at least the assets, the oil mills, Mr. President, among other assets, Mr. President.
All right. Upon enactment of this measure, Mr. President, how many coconut farmers will benefit from the measure?
Well, the estimated universe of coconut farmers in the country is 3.5 million, Mr. President. And the target, Mr. President, is at least initially the development plan proposal that we have prior to the new administration's before this administration came into office, the strategy or the approach was to move for coconut enterprise development, meaning we move away from subsistence farming, which is the norm for coconut farmers, and build their capacity so that they graduate into farm enterprise, coconut enterprise development. So the target really is ultimately the entire
The 3.5.
yes, should benefit from the Coconut Levy Trust Fund measure, Mr. President.
Who shall identify or the beneficiaries of the Coconut Farmers and Industry Development Plan that you mentioned a while back when you were being interpolated?
Yes.
Universal approach din to, or
Mr. President, the question is who will benefit again?
who shall identify the
Who shall
beneficiaries?
identify? Sorry.
Oh.
Yes, Mr. President, the primary agency that has to deal with the industry would be the Philippine Coconut Authority. Right now, they are going through the completion of their coconut farmers registry, and this will be the basis, Mr. President, as to how to target the coconut farmers, Mr. President, through this registry that is being put together and completed by the Philippine Coconut Authority.
Will the recorded holders of the Coco Fund receipts be included as beneficiaries?
Mr. President, all coconut farmers, Mr. President, would be included.
And most of them would be holders of Coco Fund.
A number of them, I would think, Mr. President, would be holders of these instruments, Mr. President. However, as we said in an earlier interpellation, because of the ruling of the Supreme Court, which we would like to think is precisely a supervening event, the holders of these instruments may no longer claim them, or for lack of a better term, may no longer encash, as a matter of speaking, or get the cash equivalent of these instruments, precisely because the Supreme Court said that this is public funds, this is public money, the levy is a tax, and therefore the fund in itself cannot be given to private individuals. It must be utilized for the benefit, by way of programs and by way of projects for the benefit of the coconut farmer and the development of the coconut industry.
Well, now that you've mentioned it, let me move on to that. I hope you can give us an update on the June 30, 2015 TRO issued by the Supreme Court against the implementation of Executive Order, I think, 179 and 180.
Yes, Mr. President, it is still in effect.
Update? Huh?
It is still in effect. The Supreme Court has not lifted.
So it's not lifted, huh? It's not
Yes,
been
Mr.
lifted?
President.
Oh, okay. Well, if it has not been lifted, what measures will be taken to lift the aforesaid TROs relative to eventual implementation of this proposed measure?
Mr. President, ultimately the passage of this law. What is being questioned actually were the two EOs that were issued by then President Aquino. So the TRO is directed towards the validity or questioning the validity of these two EOs. And it is our position, Mr. President, that and based on the numerous rulings of the Supreme Court in a number of cases involving the Coco Levy Fund, that it would be put to rest, the issue of the Coco Levy Fund disbursement would be put to rest if there is an legislation to this effect. And precisely this is what we are pushing for.
Yeah, I think earlier you also mentioned that there are already some laws that are already in place relative to the Coconut Levy Fund. in this measure, what are the specific safeguards that you are proposing that shall guarantee the utilization of the COCO levy funds and assets for the protection of the industry?
Yes, Mr. President, I think the most prominent safeguard, as we are proposing, is the use only of the interest income and not the principal. By doing this, Mr. President, we are looking at anywhere between 3 to 4 billion pesos annually, instead of allowing government to utilize the entire fund of 75 plus 25 billion assets, and therefore it may go in one blow. Ika nga, one major safeguard is that we are restricting the use of the fund, creating a perpetual fund so that hindi ito mauubos. This is in perpetuity, and that the interest income will only be used so that in perpetuity the programs that will benefit the coconut farmers will be continuous, Mr. President.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. President. Now, moving on to Section 5 of the bill, stipulated as to when the reconveyance of coconut levy assets shall commence, and that is, quote, immediately upon effectivity of the act. However, there is no specific mention as to the maximum period or duration that the reconveyance should be done. Well, don't you think for effective implementation of the act, a timely reconveyance of the COCO levy asset should be made? When you say immediate, what do we mean by that? Do you have any specific duration in mind, like let's say 1 month, 2 months, or whatever?
Well, Mr. President, perhaps that's actually a very good question, and this was discussed during some of the consultation meetings. The primary concern of putting a timetable, Mr. President, is that some of
of not putting a timetable.
of not putting a timetable, is that some of the assets are still in dispute and are still pending before
I
the
see.
courts, and therefore we may not be able to determine or put a timetable because precisely we don't know, we are not in a position to get the Supreme Court, for example, or our courts to decide in a set time or a deadline, Mr. President. However, Mr. President, those that are outside or no longer in dispute,
All right.
the timetable really is
You immediately.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
If the good majority leader would be willing and we would be amenable, we can actually provide a timetable or a deadline for those that are already outside are no longer pending before our courts, perhaps, and we may look into that during the period of amendments, Mr.
All right,
President.
perhaps we can do that after when we arrive at the period of individual amendments. Now, according to the measure also, only the trust fund income shall be used to fund the programs and projects identified in the Coconut Farmers and Industry Development Plan. Do you foresee any instance that the trust fund will not earn any income?
Mr. President, that is in the realm of the possible, but we'd like to think that as conservative as perhaps government bonds or treasury bills, it would in fact earn income, Mr. President.
All right. What if the trust fund is not sufficient to fund the programs and projects identified in the plan later on? Would there be a plan to implement, how do you plan to implement the programs and projects?
Well, Mr. President, there was a proposal, and we can tackle this during the committee amendments, that a portion of the principal actually should be allocated in the first year or first 2 years. In fact, well, there is a proposal. It is in the bill, but the proposal of I think another senator is to make it more than 10%, because in the bill it says 10% of the principal can be utilized to start up in order to have a greater impact. But we can actually look at a possible increase in that amount so that funding, at least in the onset, will not be difficult or will not be a problem. But having said that, Mr. President, the challenge really is for the development plan. If approved, it should be geared towards a gradual and therefore limited use, or at least limiting it to the interest income only, Mr. President.
All right. Now, the Bureau of Treasury shall act as the depository, no, of the trust fund.
That is
and
correct.
in relation thereto, it shall perform several functions, as I read it. You know, would there be positions to be created within the Bureau for the implementation of this act?
They're already doing it. No, Mr. President, because as we understand it, the Bureau of the Treasury is already doing these investments with other agencies and are doing fund releases already. So they already have the bureaucracy in place to address this, Mr. President.
Well, I understand that in the preparation of the plan, there is an ad hoc committee that will be constituted.
That is correct, Mr. President.
And one of the agencies that will be part of is the CHED, Commission on Higher Education. May we know why CHED is included in the ad hoc committee?
Mr. President, for two reasons. One, the state universities, agriculture, whose expertise is in agriculture, we would like to get them on board precisely because of the need to ensure that there is enough research, there is enough training, which of course is the expertise of the academe. So that is reason number one. The second reason, Mr. President, is that there is the intention to have scholarships for children of coconut farmers. And again, that would be the scholarships to include TechVoc, Mr. President. Because the presiding officer now is the expert. I'm sure he will be happy to know that we are including that, CHED, precisely because of the training.
Right.
That's why I fully support, Mr. Chair.
That's good. It's a very laudable endeavor, no? The scholarships for the... kulang na tayo sa mga farmers.
That is correct.
Ang profile ng farmer lately, I think, is more than 50 years old.
57, 56 years old, Mr.
Correct. No? They used to be 26, 27 years old.
That is correct. Tumatanda.
Alright.
Wala na hong gustong magsaka sa mga kabataan dahil nga paghihikahos at hirap. But if we move away from subsistence farming precisely and build the capacity for farm enterprise management and development, as we would like to see in the coconut industry, wherein they will not only be limited to copra, they will also go into cocoa water, they will also go into cocoa peat, cocoa coir, cocoa net. Dadagdag ang kanilang kita, Mr. President, maiengganyo na rin silang to go into farm enterprises management, Mr. President.
All right. Hindi. What about the Department of Finance? Bakit ang Department of Finance is not a member of the ad hoc committee? Because I understand the Secretary shall chair the Coconut Farmers and Industry Trust Fund, no?
Yes.
So, a committee, I should say, committee.
Yes. The DOF is a member, based on the proposal, of the Trust Fund Committee, Mr. President.
Okay. In the committee, but not in the ad hoc, but
Yes. The ad hoc,
oversee, no? Oversee.
yes, Mr. President, the ad hoc committee is tasked to create, put together the coconut industry development plan. It will be submitted for approval. Well, it will be first passed upon by the committee, which will then endorse it to the President for approval, Mr. President. So the DOF is present in the committee, Mr. President.
Okay. Now, there will be 3 representatives from coconut farmers organizations in the ad hoc committee.
Yes, Mr. President.
What would be the qualifications or guidelines for choosing these representatives? Is it the same qualifications provided for the coconut farmer sector in the main committee? Or less?
More or less, Mr. President, it should be the same, that he has a proven track record in the, as a coconut farmer, that he or she has knowledge precisely of the industry, and therefore be able to contribute in the crafting of the development plan, Mr. President.
So can a member of the ad hoc committee from the coconut farmers organizations be a member of the main committee?
It may be possible, Mr. President, but ideally you'd like to have as many participants as possible, Mr. President. So if I were to decide on this matter, I would rather have a different set of representatives in the committee and the ad hoc committee so that there is greater participation from their sector, Mr. President.
Although both the qualifications or guidelines for choosing would be this
More or less,
practically
Mr.
the same.
President.
All right, thank you. Have you already identified specific programs for social protection that directly benefit the coconut farmers, farm workers, their families, to be included in the coconut farmers and industry development plan?
Capacity building, training. Mr. President, as we earlier mentioned, scholarships would be one such social protection program. We're also looking at training, Mr. President, capacity building for our coconut farmers. There is a pending proposal on insurance, but in the end, Mr. President, we'd like to give the Trust Fund Committee as well as the Ad Hoc Committee the leeway to be able to determine these social protection programs, Mr. President.
But eventually,
Yes, Mr. President.
they will be identified in these specific programs.
Yes, Mr. President.
All right. Now, just going back a little, why do you call it committee, not an office or commission or council or bureau? I mean, may dahilan ba ito?
Well, yes, Mr. President, there's been criticism that we will be creating another bureaucracy. So to avoid that, we didn't want to create a new office. We didn't want to create an agency or a new corporation. Just to keep it simple, Mr. President, it is simply a trust fund committee.
All right. But you will be creating, won't we be creating an office under the office of the President then, by virtue of this act?
Just the office of the executive director, Mr. President.
How many positions shall be created for this?
Sir, we envision it to be as small as an oversight committee, Mr. President.
Okay.
Maybe
All right.
15, 20 people, Mr. President, at most.
Okay. Will this measure affect the powers and functions of the
amendments. But by and large, the PCA will focus on its mandate, and they will sit in the trust fund committee. They will have representatives there, a representative there, and they will actually be critical in helping execute and then implement the program, Mr. President. Again, consistent with our desire not to create another layer of a bureaucracy, Mr. President, we are more than willing to get at the proper time, some amendments so that we can really strengthen the coordination between the PCA and the Trust Fund Committee, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. We can surely look into that also. All right. Just one more question, Mr. President. What are the laws or the bills? What are the laws that this bill will seek to repeal or amend?
PD 1234 is one, Mr. President, the presidential decree.
PD 1234. Okay.
Yes, the presidential decree that mandate that allowed or empowers the PCA to utilize the COCO levy fund. That I'd like to think would be amended. Portions of the PCA Charter 2, Mr. President, will also be amended. Again, in terms of the mandate of the use of the COCO levy fund. What else? We will take a look at the other PDs, Mr. President, because there are a number. But at least these two PDs will be affected, and portions of their provisions will be amended, primarily on the mandate of the use and disbursement of the levy funds, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. President, I wish to thank the gentleman for favoring us with answers to our queries. There is no more, I do not know of any other senator who wish to interpolate. So I move to close the period of interpolation on Senate Bill 1233, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The motion is carried.
We'd like to thank the Senate President and the Majority Leader. We will now prepare for the period of committee
Committee
amendments.
amendments, di ka pa ready yan.
Next week.
Thank you, Senator Kiko Pangilinan.
Thank you. With that, Mr.
Sir
President,
Majority Leader.
I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1233 under Committee Report Number 8.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion of the Majority Leader is carried.
Mental health. Mental health. Okay lang daw. Sino mag-interpolate? Wala. Sara ko lang. Hindi, sasara ko lang. Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1354 under Committee Report Number 41.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion is carried.
Mr. President, this is the proposed measure on the Mental Health Act of 2017. Parliamentary status of the measure is we're in the period of interpolation. So I move to recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Senator Risa Ontiveros is recognized.
Mr. President, there are no more interpolators, so I move to close the period of interpolation, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader.
Huwag na muna ngayon, amendments. Huwag na muna. Speak na. Speak na. Okay. Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1354 under Committee Report Number 41.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Congratulations. Fast break time.
Mr. President, your Committee on Rules moved for the referral of the remaining bills and resolutions transferred to the Committee on Rules yesterday to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights. So after such referral, I now move to include Senate Bills 1274, 1275, 868, 1285, 1310, 1128, and 221, including PS Resolutions number 70 and 126 as integral parts of Committee Report number 18.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The motion is carried.
Mr. President, I move that Senate Bill 1374 be referred to the Committee on Rules, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Mr. President, the Committee on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, I move to elect Senator Nancy Binay as chairperson, and vice chairperson is Senator Cynthia Villar, with members Subiri Ejercito Gatchalian, Trillanes de Lima, and ex-officio members Recto, Soto III, and Drilon.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion is carried.
Mr. President, as chairman of the Committee on Rules, I move that Senate Bill 1374 be referred to be included in the Committee Report number 18 of the Committee on Justice.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Upon the request of Senator Gatchalian, Mr. President, after hearing the concurrence of the concerned author and sponsor, with the permission of the body, I move that we transfer the primary referral of Senate Bill 1371 from the Committee on Public Services to the Committee on Energy.
Is there any objection to the motion of the majority floor leader? Chair hears none. The motion is carried.
The committee, just for the record, the Committees on Public Services, Ways and Means, and Financial, therefore, be the secondary committees of Senate Bill 1371. Thank you, Mr. President.
Noted, Mr. Majority Floor.
Now, Mr. President, I move to consider PS Resolution 321.
Is there any objection? The chair is none. The motion is carried.
We ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure, Mr. President.
Secretary General is directed.
Resolution expressing the profound sympathy and sincere condolence of the Senate of the Philippines on the death of Dr. Dreyfus Perlas, a humanitarian doctor.
Mr. President, to sponsor the resolution, I move to recognize Senator Gordon, author of the measure.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The author of the Senate Resolution number 321, Senator Richard Gordon, is now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Majority Floor Leader, my fellow senators. I rise today to sponsor a resolution involving one of our young people who serve in a program of the DOH called Doctors to the Barrios. This young man, who studied in the University of the Philippines and in homegrown schools in Aklan and in the University of Western Visayas, grew up and was raised by a couple that worked very, very hard. Mother Nene was a school teacher to this day in a school in Aklan. And his father was a humble seafarer, and both this hardworking couple were able to raise two siblings, Dr. Dreyfus Perlas and another nurse named Luella. Today, Luella stands alone as part of the family because Dr. Dreyfus speaks no more. He was killed in Lanao del Norte in Barangay Maranding, Kapatagan, on his way to Lala Town around 7:30 p.m. when he was gunned down. The story is very poignant, Mr. President, because this young man not only had parents who worked very, very hard to get him educated. Imagine a seafarer father saving money to put his son, who's also a scholar, by the way, to school all the way to medical school. And when he got to medical school and graduated from the University of Western Visayas in Iloilo, after having passed UP Los Baños, majoring in biology as a scholar thereat, he decided to join in 2012, a year after he graduated, the Doctors to the Barrios program. He was sent to Sapad, a poor municipality in Lanao del Norte province, in Mindanao, which had not enjoyed the services of municipal health officer for 12 years. There he was known for traveling solo to remote villages to conduct medical checkups and deliver other medical services. Now, Your Honor, this is a country, many of our citizens do not see a doctor when they die. 6 out of 10 Filipinos die without ever having seen a doctor. This young man went to the barrios to minister to his countrymen who could not afford a doctor and minister to their health. At times, he would shell out his own money to ensure that destitute patients are able to buy the prescribed medication or pay for ambulance services when required. And he opted after his term to remain in Sapad even after his tour ended. He was a doctor to the barrios all the way to his death. He served also in Zamboanga. And in Zamboanga, if you can take a look at the picture, he was there during the Zamboanga siege, where 14 of our fellow Red Cross volunteers were wounded, and Dr. Dreyfus Perlas was also there exposing them himself along with the other volunteers in the line of fire. I spoke to his mother this morning after having tried to contact her several times. And of course, I told her the sympathies of the Senate and that there have been several proposals to investigate the death within the Senate. It's of little comfort to a family that had high hopes for a young man, very tall, very handsome. I think he was 6 feet 3 inches in height, and kind. So there are no words that can fully express his parents' agony and sorrow, their agony and sorrow that the life of their firstborn was abruptly snuffed out while he was staying in the community that he loved so much and opted to serve. As members of this august chamber join his family and the whole nation in their moment of bereavement over the untimely and violent demise of an extraordinary doctor whose Christ-like dedication to the Hippocratic Oath and to the people he wanted to serve must serve as an inspiration for others who are in the medical field. Think of our own children who would someday, because of their belief, volunteer to go to a far-flung area, and then, while serving there for humanity, is suddenly killed. Think of the agony. Think of the dreams lost, not necessarily the tears, but also, let's think not only of the woes and the agony, but also of the great honor that the family must feel and that we must also help them feel by coming out with a resolution of condolences in the highest legislative body of this country. We therefore call on the government, and I will not let it fall on deaf ears. After all, I have known the bitterness of losing loved ones through crime. We call government, therefore, the authorities, especially the police force and the judicial branch, to immediately take action and to unceasingly pursue the malefactors of the crime until they're all captured so that justice is served on the death of Dr. Perlas. Now, late this morning, I heard that one of the malefactors had already been shot and killed. I don't really approve of the killing, because I would like to see, and I would want to see, if indeed he was the malefactor, that he goes to trial and that the whole country sees the judicial system work and how he must have to pay for his sin if indeed that man was the one behind the killing. I understand there were 2 others involved in this killing, and therefore the Senate must not stop. I urge all the senators to sign this resolution unanimously so that we could send this to the PNP, General Bato de la Rosa himself, so that he will realize the urgency of the need to solve the case of this young man. And therefore, Mr. President, we all know that there is an increasing trend in criminal-related cases, including issues of extrajudicial killings in our country for the last several decades, Mr. President. Tonight, I'm trying to push remedial legislation to address this extrajudicial killing, and it is not a spot decision. Some of the proposals that we have written have been done by this representation previously, and we want to strengthen them, like the plebs, or for that matter, finally get riding in tandem, motorcycle-driven killers to justice. There are other bills that I would like to sponsor tonight. And hopefully, we can turn to our countrymen and say the Senate was not asleep. We can debate, we can shout at each other, we can even have words against each other, but what we must not do is show that we are crippled, that we are unable to react to this spate of extrajudicial killings that has surrounded this country for the last 4 or 5 decades. Most especially to the young. The young man who went out of his way, went in harm's way, at nagpunta doon sa Mindanao na kung magkabisan sa isang tiga Maynila o tiga syudad, nakakatakot isipin na pupunta doon upang magsilbi sa mga taong hindi niya kilala. Karamihan, iba ang faith, although we worship the same God, he never made fear be in the way of his aspiration not to allow that statistic of 6 out of 10 Filipinos dying without ever seeing a doctor. And so today, Mr. President, I rise and ask the Senate to express unanimously, as it hereby expresses, our profound sympathies and sincere condolences to the parents of the death of a selfless doctor, Dr. Dreyfus Perlas, to honor him and to inspire others to follow his ilk. You know, we are all defined by our youth, and this young man would have had a great future if he had been allowed to do so. Most of us were young when we started. We are what we are today because of our past. Scholars or student leaders, as the case may be, joining extracurricular activities in college, pursuing our causes in the prime of our youth, proving our idealism not just by words but by deeds, and proving to the last breath of the body that it was not a worthless sacrifice. So, Mr. President, I'd like to end there and say, death be not proud. You will pardon me I am often most easily affected. I try to be of strong heart, but when something like this happens, it reminds all of us of our frailty and our duty to our fellow men. Let this sacrifice be worthy and not be wasted, and let it not add to our apathy, our indifference, our feeling of being mere spectators in the drama of making life a little better for all. To seek justice for those who cannot defend themselves anymore, and to find the sympathy and the condolences required to console parents of a great young man that they have raised through great difficulty and sacrifice. I ask the Senate, therefore, to write the necessary documentation and submit it to the family today. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dick Gordon, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, may I move to recognize the Minority Leader, Senator Frank Drilon.
The Minority Leader is now recognized, Senator Drilon.
Mr. President, we rise to associate ourselves with the resolution being proposed. Indeed, Dr. Dreyfus Perlas is somebody that we can look up to in terms of the service that he has rendered to the people, particularly in the field, in the medical profession, and having joined the Doctors for the Barrios program would indicate his deep commitment to help and improve the lives of his people. It is in that sense that the minority bloc would join and move move that we unanimously pass, subject to style, proposed Senate Resolution number 321, just sponsored by Senator Richard J. Gordon. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Drilon. Senator Riza Ontiveros, like to say something? Senator Ontiveros is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and Majority Leader. I wholeheartedly join my Minority Leader's manifestation of support for the good gentleman from Zambales' resolution. I met Dr. Dre, as his family and friends call him, at his Doctors to the Barrios graduation at the Development Academy of the Philippines in 2014. He is also an island mate of mine and my minority leaders, all of us coming from Panay Island. And I also filed one of the resolutions mentioned by the good gentleman from Zambales, in particular Senate Resolution number 310, precisely also seeking an immediate resolution of the case, as well as provision of greater and better protection in the field for our public health service providers. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much to the good gentleman.
Thank you, Senator Ontiveros. Senator Gordon.
I would like to thank the minority, headed by my good friend Senator Franklin Drilon, and of course Liza Ontiveros, and certainly the majority floor here, and all of us here.
The Chair would also like to associate himself to the sentiments of the good sponsor.
I'm sure there will be no objection to move unanimously on this matter, and I so move, Mr. President. But at the same time, I would also like to add that I will also be filing a resolution to allow the government to provide insurance for all doctors to the barrios, life insurance, so that they can do their services well and not be worried if they leave their loved ones behind. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
That is duly noted. Thank you, Senator Gordon. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I move to adopt PS Resolution 321, subject to style.
Is there any objection? The Chair hears none. The motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, March 13, 2017.
Is there any objection? There being none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, March 13, 2017.